AITA for bringing my own food to my mother-in-law's house after years of her guilt-tripping me about her cooking. I, 32M, have been dealing with my mother-in-law's aggressive culinary warfare for exactly 4 years. And if you think that sounds like a typical family complaint, just wait until you hear how it ended with a fake crime scene, felony charges, and a court-ordered eviction. I have a medically diagnosed severe allergy to tree nuts. It requires me to carry an EpiPen everywhere I go. It is not a dietary preference, and it is not a health fad. It is a literal matter of life and death. Yet, from the moment I married my wife, 30F, my mother-in-law made it her personal mission to prove that my allergy was nothing more than an attention-seeking behavior. She would sneak walnut oil into salad dressings. She would crush pecans into the crust of her baked chicken and claim it was just extra crispy panko breadcrumbs. Every single time I caught it before taking a bite, or every time I had a mild cross-contamination reaction that forced me to take Benadryl and leave early, my wife would fiercely defend her. My wife would always say things like she just forgot, or she was getting older, or I was being overly sensitive. I accepted these excuses for a long time because I love my wife and I wanted peace in the family. But the breaking point happened exactly 3 weeks ago during a routine Sunday dinner. Here's a context that makes this whole situation even more ridiculous. My mother-in-law was hosting these weekly dinners at a property I own. Years ago, my mother-in-law wanted to downsize from her expensive apartment. I owned a small 2-bedroom rental townhome on the other side of our city to keep the peace. And because my wife begged me, I allowed my mother-in-law to move into the townhome. We signed a standard month-to-month lease agreement. But I charged her practically nothing, literally just enough to cover property taxes and the HOA fees. I was heavily subsidizing her life. On the day of the dinner, I was completely exhausted. I own and operate a mid-sized logistics and freight brokerage company. We had just finished a massive quarter, and I had been working 60-hour weeks. I simply did not have the energy to play Russian roulette with my dinner plate. I took matters into my own hands, cooked a simple meal of grilled lemon pepper chicken and quinoa, packed it in a glass container, and brought it with me to the townhome. When we arrived, the smell of roasted pork filled the house. We sat at the dining table, and my mother-in-law began serving plates. When she reached me, I politely declined, pulled my glass container out of my bag, popped the lid, and started eating. The room went completely silent. My mother-in-law stared at me, her face turning a deep mottled red. She asked me what I was doing, her voice trembling with this insane, unearned rage. I told her calmly that I brought my own food tonight because I wanted to make sure I didn't have to worry about any accidental nut exposure. I explained I had a huge meeting the next morning and could not afford a Benadryl hangover. My mother-in-law slammed her serving spoon onto the table and started yelling that I was disrespecting her home, disrespecting her as a mother, and treating her like she was trying to murder me. I simply told her I was just eating my own dinner. My wife kicked me under the table, hissing at me to put away, telling me I was embarrassing her and to just eat what her mother cooked and stop being dramatic. I said no. My mother-in-law didn't say another word. She walked over to my side of the table, grabbed my glass container, and threw it directly into the kitchen trash can. The glass shattered, and the food was completely ruined. She looked at me with this sickeningly smug expression and told me that in her house, I eat what she provides or I leave. I stood up. I didn't yell, and I didn't argue. I looked at my wife, fully expecting her to finally draw a line and defend me. Instead, my wife looked away and crossed her arms. I told them I was leaving, walked out the front door, got into my truck, and drove home. That night, my wife slept in the guest room. She refused to speak to me, claiming I had humiliated her family. I was furious, but my anger quickly shifted into something much colder. Something was very wrong. The entitlement was one thing, but the absolute lack of empathy from my wife felt unnatural. It gnawed at me, and I couldn't sleep at all. The next morning, I went to my office. My wife handled all the bookkeeping for my business. She had a background in accounting, and when we got married, it made sense to save money on a CPA and let her handle the internal ledgers. I trusted her entirely. But sitting in my office, thinking about the sheer malice in my mother-in-law's eyes and my wife's blind loyalty, a very dark thought crept into my mind. if she would let her mother physically harm me. What else was she letting her do? I logged into the main corporate banking portal. Usually, I only checked a high-level dashboard for total revenue and operational expenses. This time, I pulled the detailed transaction logs for the past 18 months. I exported everything into a spreadsheet and started matching the vendor payouts against our active contracts. It took me 6 hours to find a discrepancy. There was a recurring payment to an LLC called Apex Consulting Solutions. The payment started small, a couple thousand here and there. Over the last 8 months, the frequency and amounts had escalated dramatically. The most recent payment, processed just 4 days prior, was for $12,000. I checked our vendor files and found absolutely nothing. No invoices, no emails, no service agreements, no tax documents. I pulled up the state registry of businesses and ran a search for the LLC. The registered agent was a generic third-party legal service, but the mailing address for the LLC's annual report was a P.O. box. I recognized that P.O. box immediately. It was the exact same one my mother-in-law used for her personal mail, because she always claimed the mail carrier on her street was unreliable. My wife had been siphoning money from my company directly to her mother. I sat at my desk for a long time, just processing the absolute betrayal. It explained everything. It explained why my wife tolerated the abuse, and it explained why my mother-in-law felt completely untouchable. They viewed me as nothing more than an ATM. The food sabotage wasn't just spite, it was a distraction. If I was constantly sick, tired, and dealing with medical issues, I wasn't looking at the books. I did not go home. I called my corporate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense guy, and told him I needed to see him immediately. I printed every ledger, every state registry page, and every transaction receipt. When I laid it all out on his desk, he reviewed the documents in total silence. He told me this was straight-up embezzlement. Because she was my wife and I gave her access to the accounts, it complicated the civil recovery. But the criminal liability for fraud and theft was massive. He asked how much was missing, and I told him it was $84,000 in total. My lawyer advised me to get a forensic accountant to trace the exact destination of funds. He gave me strict instructions not to confront her yet. If she knew that I knew, she would destroy the local hard drives, delete the accounting software backups, and likely try to drain whatever was left in the operating accounts. We needed to lock her out quietly. I spent the next 2 days executing a silent financial lockdown. I opened new accounts at a completely different bank under a new corporate entity name. I redirected all incoming client payments to the new accounts. I restricted the original accounts to read-only access. I revoked my wife's administrative privileges on the payroll software. I did all of this while pretending everything was totally normal. I went home, ate dinner in silence, and slept in the master bedroom while she continued her silent treatment in the guest room. By Thursday, she noticed. I was at the office when my phone rang, and she demanded to know why the main operating account was locked. Her tone was incredibly sharp and authoritative. I lied smoothly, telling her the bank flagged a suspicious transaction from an out-of-state vendor, and that the fraud department froze it while they investigate. I told her it should be cleared up by next week. She snapped at me, saying she had bills to pay that day and needed to process outlays. I just played dumb. Say it was out of my hands, and the bank required a full security audit that takes 5 to 7 business days. She hung up on me. 10 minutes later, I checked the security cameras I had installed in our house. A month prior, we had hired a new dog walker to take our golden retriever out during the day. For liability reasons, I had installed 3 discrete cameras in the living room, the kitchen, and facing the front door. My wife knew about them, but she didn't know they recorded high-definition audio, and she definitely didn't know they uploaded straight to a secure cloud server instead of a local hard drive. I pulled up the live feed of the kitchen. My wife was pacing back and forth, holding her phone to her ear. I listened as she told her mother that I said the bank froze the account, but that she didn't think I knew the truth because I sounded completely clueless. Then she said she couldn't transfer the money today, and that her mother had to tell them she needed an extension. She promised her mother she would get the money and just needed a few days to get me to authorize a new card, warning her mother to just hide if those guys came to the townhome. That was the missing piece. My mother-in-law had a massive gambling problem. The $84,000 wasn't funding a lavish lifestyle. It was paying off bookies or loan sharks. And now the well was dry, and the collectors were calling. I sent the video clip directly to my lawyer. He replied instantly, telling me to file for divorce the next day and that we were reporting the embezzlement to the police on Monday. But my wife and mother-in-law were desperate, and desperate people do not wait quietly. Friday evening, I came home from work. The house was quiet. My wife was sitting at the kitchen island, drinking a glass of wine. Her expression was entirely unreadable. She told me we needed to talk. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my distance, and just said, okay. She dropped all pretense and told me her mother needed $10,000 for an emergency debt. I told her I didn't have $10,000 in personal cash and reminded her the business accounts were frozen. She demanded I liquidate stocks or take out a personal loan, screaming that her mother was family and I was obligated to help her. I looked her dead in the eye and told her I am not obligated to pay off her mother's gambling debts. Her eyes widened. The realization hit her that I already knew everything. The panic set in immediately. She started screaming that I was a selfish, pathetic excuse for a husband. She stood up and threw her wine glass at the wall. It shattered, red wine splashing all over the white paint. She yelled that I thought I was so smart and thought I could just cut them off. I didn't react. I knew the camera on the refrigerator was recording every single second of this. I simply turned around and walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom to pack a bag. I had already decided I was leaving that night. As I pulled my suitcase from the closet, I heard a massive crash from the kitchen. It sounded like a piece of heavy furniture being overturned. Then, another crash. Glass breaking. I rushed back down the hallway. The kitchen was completely destroyed. The heavy oak dining chairs were knocked over. Plates were smashed all over the floor. The drawers were pulled open, utensils scattered everywhere. My wife was standing right in the middle of the wreckage. She had deliberately ripped the collar of her own blouse down the front. She was holding her phone to her ear, screaming into it with this manufactured, trembling terror. She was begging the 911 dispatcher for help, claiming her husband had gone crazy, was destroying the house, had hit her, and was threatening to kill her. She was pleading for them to send the police. She looked directly at me while she spoke to the dispatcher. She actually smiled at me. It was a cold, calculated, dead-eyed smile. She was framing me for domestic violence. In my state, domestic violence allegations follow a strict mandatory arrest protocol. If the police arrive and see a destroyed house, a crying woman with a torn shirt, and a man standing there, the man goes to jail immediately. It is a devastating legal maneuver. If I was arrested, a temporary restraining order would be automatically issued. I would be legally barred from my own home and my own assets. She would have exclusive control over property, giving her enough time to break into my safe, steal whatever documents she needed, and potentially manipulate my secondary accounts. It was the ultimate dirty trick, a highly entitled play to secure the funds she needed. I didn't speak a single word to her. I turned around, walked out the front door, got into my truck, and locked the doors. I drove to the end of the street and parked in the shadows. I pulled out my phone, opened the security camera app, and downloaded the last 20 minutes of footage from the kitchen and living room cameras. I saved the files to my phone, emailed them to my lawyer, and uploaded them to an external cloud drive just to be safe. 10 minutes later, 3 police cruisers flew past my truck with their sirens blaring and pulled into my driveway. I got out of my truck and walked slowly down the sidewalk toward my house. I kept my hands completely empty and held away from my body. The officers immediately had their hands on their holsters. The lead officer commanded me to stop and keep my hands visible. I spoke clearly and calmly, stating I was a homeowner, the husband, and that I was unarmed. I explained I left the house because my wife began destroying the kitchen and called 911 to falsely accuse me of assaulting her. The officers sternly told me they would determine what happened and instructed another officer to pat me down. My wife came running out the front door, sobbing hysterically. She pointed right at me, screaming that I went crazy, threw her against the counter, and smashed everything. The lead officer looked at me and told me I needed to turn around and place my hands behind my back. I kept my voice entirely steady. I told the officer that before he put those cuffs on me, I needed him to look at my phone. I explained I had high-definition, audio-enabled interior security cameras, and the footage in the last 20 minutes was queued up on the screen, showing exactly who destroyed the kitchen. The officer paused. My wife stopped crying instantly. She stammered, asking what cameras. I looked at her and said, "The ones you forgot about." The officer took my phone and pressed play. The volume was loud enough for everyone standing on the driveway to hear. The audio played crystal clear. My wife's voice yelling about how I thought I was so smart. The sound of the wine glass shattering. The footage showed me walking away down the hall. It showed my wife completely alone in the kitchen. It showed her physically knocking over the heavy chairs. It showed her taking plates out of the cabinet and throwing them onto the floor. It showed her gripping her own shirt and tearing it. And then it showed her dialing 911 and putting on her fake crime performance. The officers watched the video in complete silence. The lead officer handed my phone back to me. He turned and looked at my wife. The color had completely drained from her face. She took a step back toward the front door, stammering that I manipulated the video and that it was fake. The officer's tone completely changed. The professionalism was still there, but all the sympathy was entirely gone. He told her they just watched her stage a crime scene and file a false police report, and ordered her to turn around and place her hands behind her back. She lost her mind. She started screaming that they couldn't do this, that she was the victim, and that I cut off her mother's money. The officers absolutely did not care about her mother's money. They grabbed her arms, secured the handcuffs, and read her Miranda rights right there on the lawn. The sheer entitlement she had carried for years just evaporated in seconds as she was shoved into the back of the police cruiser. She was arrested for filing a false police report and misuse of the 911 emergency system. I walked back into my house, and the silence was beautiful. I packed my bags, secured my important business documents and passports from the safe, and drove to a hotel. First thing Monday morning, my lawyer and I went straight to the district attorney's office. We didn't just bring the video of the fake assault. We brought the forensic accountant's preliminary report, the LLC registration, and the bank statements. The financial crimes unit took over immediately. Embezzlement of over $80,000 is a serious felony. While my wife was sitting in a holding cell waiting for arraignment, I initiated the civil procedures. I filed for divorce. We had no children. The house we lived in was purchased by me, with my own money, 3 years before we got married, in our state. That made it separate property, not subject to equitable distribution. My lawyer filed an emergency motion for exclusive use and possession of the marital home, citing her arrest for staging domestic violence against me and the pending felony embezzlement charges. The family court judge granted it immediately. She was legally barred from returning to my house and had to move back in with her mother, but I was far from finished. Remember the townhome my mother-in-law was living in? The one I owned and subsidized? She had been living in my property while simultaneously attempting to poison my food and helping her daughter steal my business capital to pay off her gambling debts. I drafted a formal 30-day notice to quit in our state because she was on a month-to-month lease. I did not need to provide a legal cause to terminate the tenancy. I just needed to give proper notice. I didn't mail it, and I didn't send an email. I hired a private process server to go to the townhome and physically hand the documents to her. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. I let it go straight to voicemail. She left a screeching 3-minute tirade calling me a vindictive monster, crying that I put her daughter in jail, and screaming that I was throwing an old woman out on the street. She said I owed them, that I ruined the family, and threatened to tell everyone what I really was if I didn't cancel the eviction. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to my lawyer. The divorce proceedings were absolutely brutal for them. My wife hired a cheap, inexperienced attorney who tried to argue that the business funds she transferred to her mother were marital gifts and that she had the authority to distribute them. My lawyer systematically dismantled that garbage argument in about 5 minutes. He introduced the LLC documents, proving the payments were intentionally disguised as fraudulent vendor invoices to hide them from the company's ledger. A legitimate gift does not require fake invoices and shell companies. The judge was furious. Family court judges do not look kindly on spouses who drain business assets through corporate fraud, especially when paired with fake domestic violence arrest. Because of severe financial misconduct, the judge awarded me a wildly disproportionate share of the remaining joint marital assets. She was ordered to pay full restitution for the embezzled funds. Since she had no money and no job, a strict lien was placed against any future earnings she might ever have. She got absolutely nothing from my house, and she got zero spousal support. The criminal cases proceeded slowly, as the justice system always does. My wife eventually pleaded out to a lesser felony charge of theft by deception to avoid serving actual prison time. She received 5 years of strict probation, mandatory community service, and thousands of dollars in court fines on top of my restitution. As for my mother-in-law, she actually refused to vacate the townhome after the 30 days expired. She thought she could play the system. She thought she could claim squatters' rights or delay the eviction process for months by crying hardship to the court. She severely underestimated my willingness to follow through with the law. I immediately filed an unlawful detainer action because the notice to quit was legally flawless, and because I had absolute proof of ownership in the signed lease terms. The court scheduled an eviction hearing within 3 weeks. They both showed up to the eviction hearing. They looked completely exhausted and defeated. The arrogant entitlement that used to radiate from them was totally gone, replaced by a desperate, bitter anger. My mother-in-law stood before the judge and cried her eyes out. She claimed she was elderly, sick, and had nowhere else to go. She pointed at me and claimed I was a rich, abusive son-in-law, throwing her out purely out of spite. The judge listened patiently, then looked down at the lease agreement. He told her that this was a month-to-month tenancy. The landlord provided adequate legal notice, and the law does not require me to house her indefinitely. He granted the judgment of possession to me right then and there. He gave her exactly 7 days to vacate the premises, or the county sheriff would physically remove her and her belongings and change the locks. They didn't wait for the sheriff. 5 days later, a neighbor from the townhome complex called me to let me know they were frantically loading up a U-Haul truck in the middle of the night. They moved into a cramped, low-income apartment on the far outskirts of the county. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my mother-in-law's creditors eventually caught up with her, and she was forced to declare complete bankruptcy. My ex-wife is currently working as a cashier at a chain grocery store, struggling to make her monthly probation and court-ordered restitution payments. I sold the townhome. I restructured my logistics business, implemented massive financial safeguards, and hired a highly professional CPA firm to handle all future accounting and payroll. I took a month-long solo vacation to Europe, ate absolutely whatever I wanted without fear of deliberate cross-contamination, and focused entirely on rebuilding my peace of mind and enjoying my life. Sometimes the people who demand the most from you, the ones who constantly demand you compromise your boundaries for family, are the ones actively trying to destroy you. They rely on your silence. They rely on your willingness to endure their toxicity just to keep the peace. But the moment you stop playing their game, the moment you force them to face the absolute, unvarnished consequences of their own actions, their power vanishes entirely. I walked away with my business, my home, and my health. They walked away with nothing but the devastating consequences of their own entitlement. If you love seeing these entitled manipulators get exactly what they deserve, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's the only thing completely nut-free and guaranteed to satisfy.